Hey guys, it's Steve here. Today I'm going to be answering some sight reading questions. I've been receiving quite a few of these since the interview with the session guitarist video. We discussed sight reading a bit in that video. The questions have been really revolving around not so much how to learn sight reading or how to improve your sight reading. I mean, I'm happy to talk about that if it's something you're interested in. If you are, just sit in the comments and I can perhaps do something about that. I do have a strategy and a system for learning sight reading as it happens, but these comments were more along the lines of what will you actually encounter if you're out there working as a musician? What sort of reading are you likely to encounter? I'll read an excerpt of one of the questions which sort of encapsulates most of them. It says, as a guitarist on a reading gig, do you often find you'll have to sight read chords as well as single notes? Are the chords not written above the stave? Well, let's look at it this way. On the one hand, if you think of it as a spectrum, on the one hand you've got chord charts, which don't have any notes on them, any dots with note values on them. They'll just have a series of bars, maybe 4 bars per line, like this. You've probably seen this sort of thing around. And then at the top, or maybe sometimes in the bar or above it, you have the chord. So if it's a G, C, D progression, you'll have G over bar 1, C over bar 2, D over bar 3, and then maybe 2 bars of D, so you've got, D and then 2 bars following it. Okay, so that's pretty easy to read. And there, you're expected as the guitarist, if you have no instruction as to what to play, you're expected to sort of interpret in the appropriate fashion for the styles. You draw on your own sort of stylistic awareness and your own repertoire that you've hopefully drawn from a popular canon of music that's available, recorded music. So that happens. Sometimes for those chord charts you'll get specific rhythms with rhythm slashes, rhythm notations. These are rhythmic markings just like you'd see in normal written music, but without the note heads. So there's no note value assigned to these, it's just rhythm. Okay, so then you're told what chord to play and in what rhythm, but you're not told which exact notes to play. So in that situation, it's up to you to select the particular voicing of the chord. G chord, as I'm sure you know, can be voiced in many, many different ways. There are many different ways to play a G chord. Yeah, so there you go. And so sometimes that's, you get that sometimes as well, specific rhythms, which again, sometimes you can interpret those. I mean, your basic job is to make it sound really good. There are situations where it has to be exact, but quite a lot of the time in reading gigs, you do have a bit of leeway to embellish it, and you read what's on the part, and then you make it even more musical if you can, or if it's appropriate, which is not always appropriate. So you get that, and then single notes happen. Yeah, single notes. Sometimes you have a lead part, a lead solo is written out for you. Other times there are ensemble hits where the whole band might go, da 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 da, like the Chicken or something like that. And then you'd have, chord chart would be happily chugging along, and then suddenly one of the bars or 2 of the bars would have notes just like you'd see any melody written out, and you'd have specific notes and rhythms to play that lead line. So you need to be able to read single notes in that situation. And then the next sort of step up in terms of, I suppose, difficulty in terms of sight reading is multiple notes at once. Now, this can happen if you've got a harmonized melody to play. For instance, the intro to Brown Eyed Girl, if that was written out, that would be, that guitar figure at the beginning there is a series of dyads, a series of two notes at a time. So that would be written out in 2-note chunks, right? And other times you do get specific voicing. So maybe it's a really, the arranger, the person who's written it, wants a specific voicing. Maybe you're playing a James Brown tune and they want that particular 9 chord, that particular 9 chord that's in Sex Machine or something. Not just any one, but that exact one. Or maybe it's something like Sex Machine actually, where the chords you're playing kind of are a riff or a lick or a hook in themselves. So it's important to play the same ones that are on the record. So if someone was to write that out for you and give it to you to play and to read, then you play what was on the notes. So then you've got the notes, you might even, and then you'll have usually the chord symbol will be above the bar, then the voicing they want you to use will be written out in notation, not in tab, and then that notation of course will contain the rhythmic information as to when to play the notes that they've told you to play. Okay, the kind of worst case scenario from a sight reading point of view is when they don't give you any chords at all. Chord symbols, that is. It's just like sort of you might imagine piano music would be, or you know, lots of different orchestral music. They're giving you a chord part to play, but they haven't written the chords above. Having the chords above does help actually quite a bit, because if your reading's not quite there, you can still make the sound, you know, right. It also helps because a lot of reading is contextual recognition. It's realizing kind of what the part is supposed to be saying, and then you have to ask less questions. If you know you're playing a kind of James Brown funky thing, or you know you're playing big open folky chords or something like that, then your brain just has less questions when it looks at a cluster of notes to interpret. So having the chords above is a big help, even if you're still required to play a specific voicing. Just knowing contextually like what you're aiming at, that this is this cluster of notes is a kind of 9 chord or a kind of D chord. It can be helpful. Sometimes you don't get that. Sometimes you just get just the notes by themselves with no chords. And I suppose that's sort of the worst case scenario. In terms of stressing your sight reading capabilities, because you've got to read a lot of notes. Typically if it's a chordal part, you know, maybe a strumming part, it'll be rhythmically, I wouldn't say complex, but busy perhaps, you know. Or sometimes not. So, you know, that's the sort of thing you'll see. So you see it across the whole spectrum. Now, really, a lot of reading gigs, you're not really reading at sight. So, for instance, if I do a musical, I'll always try to get the pad ahead of time. I'll try and have them send it to me ahead of time, so I can sit down, because some things, sure you can read it, but you want to think, well, I can play this line in three or four different places on the guitar. I could finger it in different ways. You know, and it's nice to have the luxury, if you have that luxury of preparation, to try a few different voicings and different fingerings for the line that they've written for you, to find something that really works nicely and musically and sort of sits the best. So if you are offered a reading gig and you have a chance to look at the stuff beforehand, you know, always ask if you can have it sent to you or emailed to you in PDF or in Sibelius or something like that, or Finale or something like that, because then you've got, you know, a bit of preparation. You still need to be able to read, you know, because you can't, you know, you don't have time generally in life to sit there and figure out everything, you know, really carefully. You need to still be able to read it, but you're not really, when you get to the gig, sight reading, which is to say reading something you've never seen before. So that's pretty helpful. There are situations like the movie score, my very first movie score that I told you guys about in the interview. I'll link to that interview below. Actually, it's quite a long interview. Someone was interviewing me about my career and also asking me a lot of advice about the challenges of being a freelance musician and what my advice is and things like that. And we talk about sight reading there. And I tell a story there where I walked in, fresh piece of music I'd never seen, and the composer came over and had me sight read it for him. Before I even had my guitar in my bag, he sort of tested me a little bit, you know. So there was a story about that. Now that is a reading situation where you're sitting and you're really sight reading it, you know. Those don't come up that often. If you're a freelance sort of contemporary kind of guy, pop sort of rock kind of person, because there's just not that much reading in those situations. However, if you start to go into musicals, will you walk into the musical on day 3 and they have a new sheet that they want you to, oh, we're going to take this line off the flute, we want to put it on the guitar? That happens, and you have to be able to sight read that. So, I mean, really, the question as to what am I going to get, which is really the question, you know, what does sight reading mean? Well, it depends on the gig, it depends on the situation, but it can be on a spectrum of just a chord chart where you fill in whatever you fancy, to a really specific, you know, transcription, let's say, of a guitar solo or a whole guitar part, you know, where everything is exact, you know. So those are the things. So another question somebody asked me was, do you have to read ledger lines, which is to say, well, if you don't know what a ledger line is, I don't know, Google it or something, but it's basically you've got the 5 lines on the normal music stage, and then when they want to put a note in there that's above or below it, they just draw a little line for the note head itself, just, you know, to allow greater range without having to change clefs or something. Well, yeah, you have to read ledger lines, yeah. Basically, any note, guitars are always written in treble clef. almost always. I've never seen it in any other thing. Maybe, well, bass guitars and bass clef, but you know, your regular 6-string guitar like this is in treble clef. So you're gonna need to be able to basically hit. I mean, the lower ledger notes aren't that low. I mean, it's down to a low E. It's not that low. It's just a few lines beneath the bottom of the stave. But of course, if you want to get up to E and beyond there, sometimes I'll have an 8VA instruction. So they'll write the part an octave down and just tell you to transpose it. That happens sometimes. But then sometimes it doesn't happen, and you've got like loads of ledger lines, and they expect you to read something up here, and like loads of ledger lines, you know. And that can be a bit of a pain in the ass. Sometimes you do have to kind of count them just to make sure you've got the right one. Because generally, if you're going to be playing something up that high, it's going to be pretty piercing and pretty audible. So you really don't want to make the mistake of coming in something that high on the wrong note, because then everyone will know, and it will be very embarrassing for everybody. So anyway, I hope that answers your question about sight reading. Some of the questions that have been coming. I'd like to be able to show you some of the charts that I have. I keep a lot of the charts that I'm asked to, when I can, that I'm asked to use. But for copyright reasons, I can't really just stick them on the screen, I don't think. But I think you get a fairly good idea. If you have any more questions about this stuff, please put them in the video below and I'll be happy to answer them. Yeah, alright. See you next time, guys. Bye-bye.